They whispered that his bedroom was a graveyard, not of bones, but of innocence. King Draven wasn't just an alpha, he was a death sentence. Every Luna sent to his chambers in the last 10 years had been carried out the next morning, pale, broken, or dead. They said the beast he kept inside him was too feral, too large, and too violent for any female body to endure. But beneath the terrifying rumors lived a secret that the world was too afraid to see. Draven, the conqueror, was a virgin king. 23 women had been sent to his bed, and 23 women had chosen to flee before he could even whisper their names. He was a weapon that had never been used, a mountain of power that had never known the warmth of a fated touch. Until the council sent him Elara, the smallest, frailest Omega in the pack. Quick question. If everyone told you a man was a monster, would you run, or would you stay to see if he was actually just lonely? If you're ready for a story where the beast falls first, hit that subscribe button. I'm chasing 1,000 subscribers, and I want you here for the ending. Now, let's return to the rain. The storm was a wall of ice. Elara ran until her lungs burned, her servant's dress clinging to her skin like a second, cold layer of grief. Behind her, the guards' boots hammered the stone. They didn't see a girl, they saw property. She turned into the king's garden and slammed into him. It wasn't like hitting a man, it was like running into a mountain of warm, living stone. She looked up and up, her head craning back just to see the amber fire in his eyes. He was so massive that he had to duck just to stand under the garden archway. A hand the size of a dinner plate shot out. Elara flinched, expecting to be crushed, but the weapon caught her arm with a touch as light as a falling leaf. He was so strong, so impossibly large, that he had learned to move with the terrified restraint of a man holding a butterfly. The lead hunter skidded to a halt. Your Majesty, that Omega is defective property. Hand her over. Draven didn't speak. He didn't need to. He stepped forward, his massive frame eclipsing the torchlight, until Elara was completely swallowed by his shadow. In that darkness, for the first time in her life, she felt safe. Property? Draven's voice was a low rumble that she felt in her own marrow. In this kingdom, the king's shadow is law, and she is standing in it. Get out. He didn't just chase them away, he erased them. When the silence returned, Elara didn't pull away. She reached out and placed a tiny, trembling hand against the center of his chest. Beneath the hard, scarred muscle, his heart beat like a war drum, steady, lonely, and reaching for her. He carried her to his chambers as if she weighed nothing at all. Inside, the bed looked like a vast island of silk. Elara watched as the legendary beast, the man who could crush armies, slowly sank to his knees before her. He didn't look at her with lust. He looked at her with a raw, terrifying wonder. His huge, calloused hands trembled as he dipped a cloth into a basin of warm water. He lifted her small, bloodied foot with the care of a priest handling a holy relic. "Why didn't you run?" he whispered, his voice rough from years of silence. Elara looked down at the king on his knees. "Because," she whispered, "I don't see a weapon, Draven. I see a man who has been waiting a very long time to be touched." For the first time in 10 years, the beast didn't pull away. The water in the porcelain basin grew cold as Draven finished cleaning the grime from Elara's feet. He moved with a heavy, agonizing slowness, as if his own muscles were a burden he didn't know how to carry. "The 23, Elara whispered, her voice barely a breath in the vast candlelit chamber. "They didn't just run because of the rumors, did they?" Draven's hands stilled. He didn't look up, but she saw the muscles in his back cord like iron cables. "They ran because they were told the truth," he said, his voice a low, jagged rasp. "The healers measured me when I came of age. They told the council that my bloodline ran too pure, that the ancient alpha strength had manifested too physically. They said no female body could survive the bonding, that I was a weapon designed only to destroy." Elara looked down at the king on his knees. "Because," she whispered, "I don't see a weapon, Draven. I see a man who has been waiting a very long time to be touched." He finally met her eyes, his amber gaze clouded with a decade of isolation. 23 women were told they would die in this bed, so they chose to live. I was measured by science, but I have never been measured by a heart. Draven stood and the room seemed to shrink around him. He walked toward the massive silk bed, his steps silent despite his weight. He reached out a hand to help her up, but he stopped inches from her face. This was the moment the other stories missed. He didn't just touch her. He hesitated. His fingers, thick and scarred, trembled against the air. To him, his touch was a mountain falling. To her, it was a question. Elara didn't wait. She leaned forward, pressing her cheek into his massive palm. His skin was rough, calloused, and burning with a feverish alpha heat. A ragged, broken sound escaped his throat, a half growl that turned into a sigh. For 30 years, he had been a titan in a world of glass. But Elara was the only one who didn't shatter when he reached out. He settled her onto the covers and immediately retreated to the very edge of the bed. He sat there, stiff as a statue, his back turned to her. He looked like a mountain trying to take up the space of a pebble. "You don't have to stay so far away," she said, her voice soft. "I don't know the geometry of gentleness, Elara," he replied, his voice dropping to a whisper. "I have spent my life preparing for war. I have conquered kingdoms, but I have never held a woman through the night. I am a beginner in a body built for the end of the world." He was a virgin king, not by choice, but by the weight of his own legend. He was terrifyingly powerful, yet in this bed, he was as lost and fragile as the girl he had just saved. Sleep finally began to pull at Elara's eyelids, the safety of the king's shadow acting as a shield against the world. But the peace was shattered by a heavy, rhythmic thudding against the chamber doors. A voice boomed through the thick oak. Kaiser Hendrix, the king's cousin, a man who smelled of ambition and spite. "Your Majesty, the council has received word. You are harboring a runaway Omega, a defective piece of property from the Carter Chen estate. They demand she be brought to the courtyard at dawn for appraisal. If she cannot prove she is a fated match, she must be returned to the auction block by noon." Elara felt the bed vibrate as Draven's posture changed. He didn't move, but the air in the room grew heavy, charged with a crushing magnetic force. He looked back at her, his amber eyes now glowing a predatory, molten gold. "They want to take you," he whispered, the sound vibrating through the mattress. "But they've forgotten one thing. A weapon doesn't just protect. A weapon destroys anything that tries to take what belongs to it." The dawn was a bruised purple, the air tasting of iron and impending rain. Draven didn't allow the guards to touch her. He walked beside Elara, a tower of silent, golden-eyed fury. Every step he took echoed through the courtyard like the beat of a war drum. He looked down at her, this tiny girl in his shadow, and for the first time, he didn't try to make himself smaller. He let her see the full scale of what he was. He was a weapon, yes, but as Elara's fingers brushed against the back of his massive hand, she felt the truth. He wasn't a weapon meant to wound her. He was a wall meant to stand between her and the world. "Don't look at them," he whispered, his voice vibrating in her chest. "Look only at me. My shadow is the only world you need to worry about now." Kaiser Hendrix stood in the center of the courtyard, surrounded by the High Council. They held scrolls and measuring tools, their faces pinched with the cold logic of men who didn't believe in fated mates. "Your Majesty," Kaiser sneered, his eyes raking over Elara's small frame, "the healers have been clear for a decade. Your physical nature is a biological impossibility for a female of this size. To claim this Omega is to sign her death warrant. She is defective, a runaway, and physically incompatible with the king's bed. Hand her over to the auctioneers so we may find you a bride who might at least survive the first night." The council murmured in agreement. They saw a monster and a mouse. They saw a mismatch of nature. Draven stepped forward, and the council recoiled. He didn't reach for his sword. He reached for Elara. He pulled her flush against him, her small head barely reaching his heart. "You speak of measurements." Draven's voice dropped to a terrifying resonant depth. "You speak of what the body can endure. But you forgot that an Alpha's power is not just in his bone and muscle, it is in his soul." He looked down at Elara, his amber eyes burning with the pent-up intensity of a virgin king who had finally found his home. "They say I am too much for you, little one. They say my very nature will destroy you." Elara didn't flinch. She stood on her tiptoes, reaching up to cup the face that had terrified 23 women before her. "Then let them watch," she whispered, loud enough for the council to hear. "Let them see that I am not afraid to take what the rest of the world was too weak to hold." In front of the entire kingdom, Draven leaned down and bit into the juncture of her neck and shoulder. The Alpha's claim. The air in the courtyard shattered. A wave of pure golden Alpha energy exploded from the contact, knocking the council members to their knees. It wasn't a scream that left Elara's lips, but a sigh of completion. The beast wasn't too much for her. He was the missing piece she had been running toward her whole life. Kaiser Hendrix scrambled to his feet, his face pale with a mix of fear and renewed hatred. The appraisal was over. The bond was undeniable. The size that had been a curse for 10 years had finally found its perfect, tiny lock. "You have claimed her," Kaiser spat, retreating toward the palace shadows. "But the Carter-Chan estate does not give up its property easily, and the council does not forget the law. You may have a mate, Draven, but you have just declared war on every noble house in the Frost Mountains." Draven didn't answer. He picked Elara up, her small body disappearing against his massive chest. He turned his back on the council, walking toward the tower where their first real night began. The world thought he was a weapon. They thought she was a victim. But as the heavy iron doors of the king's chambers locked behind them, only one truth remained. The Virgin King was no longer alone, and the tiny Omega had just become the most powerful woman in the world. Will Elara survive the Council's revenge? Subscribe for Chapter 2.